By now you've almost certainly heard of Pierre Poilievre's interview that he did with Jordan Peterson, and I know many of you, like me, have probably watched the thing in its entirety. I noticed this last Thursday night. It just sort of came across my feed, and my wife and I, we watched the thing in its entirety. And it was an interesting interview, and there was some interesting content in it. But what really struck me was how this interview seems to be pointing at something deeper that's happening in Canadian politics, in Canadian culture, and that even has, I believe, sort of religious ramifications. The way we think about politics is affected by the way we think about the world and how the world works and what is just and what the role of government is and that kind of thing. These are ultimately sort of religious or theological ideas. So I want to make a few comments about this video because I do think it does point to some changes. The big changes that I think that this is pointing to, or the fact that this interview even happened, is it didn't need to happen, but the fact that this happened suggests strongly that there is a new Canadian conservatism that seems to be emerging. Pierre Poilievre seems to be the face of it, but something is changing with just the way conservatives are in this country and maybe globally as well. The other thing that doesn't seem like so much of a headline, I know if you follow my channel, you're probably not surprised to hear me say this, but this interview reminds us yet again of how the mainstream media and the whole process, the whole infrastructure around it, especially as it pertains to politics, is becoming increasingly irrelevant. Part of me wants to say has become irrelevant. I don't believe that's true exactly. I still know lots of people who get their news from the mainstream media, and that's almost all they watch. But the fact that this interview even happened, that it wasn't the CBC that did this hour and 40-minute video with Pierre Poilievre, it was Jordan Peterson, a Canadian psychologist and intellectual. One who, by the way, has been, what's the right word, censured, I guess, by the College of Ontario Psychologists, I believe, that he's in this protracted battle with them because they think he's misusing social media or saying things that are unbecoming on Twitter, which is pretty absurd. So it's kind of interesting. Let's just zoom out for a moment. This isn't my main point, but it's worth a quick mention. You've got this college of professionals who has a real gripe with Peterson, which is crazy, and now this same person is talking to the person who will likely become our next prime minister, barring anything, well, all kinds of weird things can happen in politics and in life, but he seems to be the heir apparent to the prime ministership. So the fact that people are watching this says a lot about our media environment, especially as it pertains to politics. And also, as I alluded to earlier, I think some of the assumptions that we've had baked into what government does, why it exists, how it's meant to carry out its role, that we've had a lot of assumptions these last, I'm not sure how many years, 10 years, 50, probably goes back further, but in whatever chapter seems to be coming to an end, I think people are starting to question the role of government and what it purports to do and what it can actually do. So I want to walk through these 3 points. So like I said, this interview didn't have to happen. Pierre Poilievre is ahead in the polls. Certainly he didn't need to do this to become more popular. Any sort of interview like this comes with its own risks. Something could have gone totally wrong in this. He could have looked foolish. I think he did quite well by and large, and I think it's being received well. I think I'm looking now, it's funny, I was going to make this video on Friday, and then I ended up going out of town. So when I first noticed it on I noticed it on Thursday. When I saw it on Friday on YouTube, just YouTube, it had about 700,000 views. Now it has just crossed, I record this on Sunday afternoon, it's crossed 2 million. On Twitter, apparently it's several tens of millions according to some sources, although on Twitter, maybe if you just look for a minute or a few seconds, it counts as a view. Anyway, my point is it's hugely viewed across lots of platforms, Daily Wire as well. So that says a lot about this new type of conservative. One thing that really struck me about Pierre Poilievre in this video is that, or in this interview, is that he seems to be doing something that other conservative leaders have struggled with. You go back to the last, last conservative prime minister, which was Stephen Harper. He was, I think, arguably, I mean, I believe this, but I'm trying to be sort of as objective as possible. He was good at managing the economy. He was good with the numbers. He was good at talking about budgets and finances. He was a little bit of a wonk, but he was pretty stuffy and kind of boring and robotic and mechanical. Like he was, I don't want to say he was prickly, but he wasn't sort of warm and fuzzy. He was kind of this, this finance guy kind of thing. And then you contrast that to Trudeau, especially back in 2015 when he didn't have a record. Even though I'm not a big fan of Trudeau, and I think most people have come along to realize that, I have to admit, in 2015, like he was charming. He's handsome. He's got good hair. He could speak and he could say all those sort of hushed tones. And this is what we believe in Canada, and we need to work together. And these platitudes, these sound bites that sound good, and I admit they sound good. And I think what we're finding is he didn't have the substance. So anyway, one way to look at that is head versus heart. Maybe traditional conservatives like Harper, they were good at speaking to the head about inflation and interest rates and foreign trade and that kind of thing. Trudeau was good at speaking to the heart, telling that story, drawing us in. Poilievre seems to be able to do both quite well. In this interview, I was impressed with how he was able to rhyme off different facts and figures, not in a talking point kind of way, but in a way that suggests that he knows this data well, that he's thought about it. It didn't just have someone hand it to him, but he's actually turned it over in his mind and is able to deploy different facts and figures about the GDP and about the various wealth of different provinces, that kind of thing. You can watch the video yourself to see where this happens. Yet he's also, like Trudeau, and I don't mean this against Poilievre, but he can tell that story as well. He can also speak to the heart about, the deal that Canadians thought we had with maybe not having a fancy house, but if you work hard, you have a full-time job, you have a second income, maybe you can get a place in the suburbs, your own place, have a yard, raise a couple kids, play hockey on the weekends, have a couple vehicles in the driveway, that kind of thing. Nothing fancy, but that you would have this sort of, he doesn't quite use the term the Canadian dream, but it's something like that there was sort of this deal that people understood. So he's good, Poilievre is good at telling those stories. And I think that is suggesting this sort of new conservatism in this country that can speak to the head and the heart reasonably well. Trudeau, he had heart but didn't speak to the head. I think that's probably the big problem with his government, frankly, is he talks a good game but hasn't been able to actually fulfill what he said he's going to do. The media, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it is worth noting. I did want to say that the mainstream media has become irrelevant, but still people watch it. But Poilievre this isn't on CBC, this is on YouTube, on Daily Wire, on Twitter. I just want to show, it's hard to get good numbers here, but I'm just looking at like Power and Politics, which is a CBC program, as the page refreshes here. So this is arguably a comparable, like if Poilievre's going to talk, it would be sort of on this playlist. And just looking at some of the views they get, and again, my channel gets a few hundred views on a good day, I'm fine with that. But CBC, our public broadcaster, Power and Politics, it's getting, several tens of thousands of views, 40,000 views, 20,000 views, 75,000 views, 14,000 views, etc., etc. Occasionally it gets more than 100,000, and in a few cases it gets less than 10,000. But most of the time it is going from roughly, tens of thousands of views. Compare that to a non-journalist, psychologist, Jordan Peterson, getting literally millions of views. The mainstream media, especially since COVID, has really made itself less and less relevant. And that's interesting because on the one hand, we've got these phones, and I'm probably like a lot of you, I spend too much time scrolling, looking at little info bites. And here you have this long form interview, an hour and 40 minutes, where it's unscripted, and you get to hear from a politician about what he or she believes in. Now, to be clear, this certainly was not a softball interview. I'm not saying that. But at the same time, it's no secret that Peterson doesn't care for Trudeau and prefers Poilievre. So it was a friendly interview. There's no denying that. But even a friendly interview, like if you're going to go sit down with Peterson for a couple hours, you're going to have to know your stuff. And if you're hiding things, if you're trying to fool people, that's going to come to the surface. So the media in this country is less and less relevant. Now this last part, let's see if I can show this video here. I had a little bit of trouble getting things queued up, but actually before I get there, there's a theological, actually it's not a theological idea exactly, but it comes straight from the scriptures. I'll just share. This is from Psalm 20, and I'm reading from the NIV version here. It says, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord." And the reason that might seem like a strange thing to say about a political video here, but I think part of what's happening in this moment with this new conservatism and what's happening in our culture is I think people are starting to question, what government does. And as a believing Christian, I believe that government is necessary, but I don't believe that Pierre Poilievre or Trudeau or any party is going to be my savior. It's not up to government to save me or to even protect me in some cases. In some cases, yes, but I think Ben Shapiro talked about this. Government should be more boring. It's a little bit more like a plumber or a tradesman or someone like an accountant. Like if you have an accountant, you want an accountant to help you with your books, with your taxes. You want him or her to be competent in their job, but you don't look to your accountant to tell you about the meaning of life, or you don't look to your accountant to explain to you as an accountant that you should spend time with your family and what's of ultimate importance. And I think what's happening in this shift is we've had government, and we saw this with COVID, where even though they don't come out and say it, the idea was government will be our provider, government will be our savior, government will be our protector, that we can look to government and technology and they will set everything right. And I think people are waking up to the fact that not only is that not true, but perhaps that can't be true, even if the politicians are well intended. And that's a big difference here. And Poilievre talks about this in this interview, that he talks a lot about personal freedom, about letting businesses do business, letting people do their family stuff, and government mostly enabling and mostly staying out of the way to let things happen as they would. I'm not sure, that's probably not a great analogy, but it kind of comes to mind. A more left-leaning, politically left, well, let me just back up here a little bit. You look at what left-leaning politicians seem to be focusing on. They want to save the environment. They want to enact policies here that are going to change the global climate in several hundred years from now. That's what they tell us. They want to fix things like racism and bigotry. And I think racism is terrible. As a Christian, I believe that all people are created in the image of God and should be afforded a certain dignity. But I don't think it's government's job to kind of make that happen. I see that, well, again, as a Christian, I see that racism gets dismantled or gets defeated, is probably a better way, when I looked to God, I look to the teachings of Jesus, when I do my best to align my life with Jesus and his ways, that I'm to love my neighbor. How can I be racist and love my neighbor? That's a change in my heart, and I can't force that change on anyone else. So it's not really the role of government. On some levels, it's not exactly even the role of the church, as much as the church is to point to Jesus, and Jesus is the one who changes things. But my point is, I think as religion, especially Christianity, in the West recedes, now there might be a resurgence, but in general, since the Enlightenment, we've moved away from looking to religion, looking to Christianity, specifically looking to Christ, and looking instead to technology and technical government, and we can solve homelessness, we can solve food scarcity, we can solve poverty, we can solve domestic violence. And I think people are realizing that despite governments saying that they can do this, they're coming up short. And I think this interview gets at that there is this shift, and I think it's people are picking up on this. COVID had a lot to do with this. I remember having a conversation with someone whom I love and respect dearly, someone who's had a huge impact on my life. And we were kind of arguing about COVID. He had very different views than I have. And we were kind of escalating, not quite yelling at each other, but it was getting kind of heated. And finally he blurted out something along the lines, we're talking about safety, and he blurted out something to the effect of, but that's government's job to keep us safe. And it was almost kind of like, we'd been arguing for probably an hour, I can't remember. And it's like, we got to the bottom of it. And it's like, I disagree. I don't think that is. And it's funny, the argument kind of stopped there and we got picked up later. But the reason that this person and I disagreed on policy issues is we had deeper disagreement about the role of government. And I think, not kind of stop there, but I think those things go even deeper, that are theological views, the way we view the world, the way we view humanity, the role of people in the world, all those things are at a deep level, but they inform how we feel about whether or not we should wear masks or get vaccinated and that kind of thing. So I think in our political discourse, there might be an opportunity for us to look deeper at what are the underpinning assumptions that we take going into that inform our political views. And I think it's those things that are ultimately religious. They have to do with worldview. What do you think about people? Are people mostly good? Are people mostly bad? I happened to do some work in a jail and talking to, I'll keep it vague, but talking to someone there, a staff member, let's say, not an inmate. And my understanding from this person is she felt that the default, the fact that people are in jail means that something's wrong with society to cause them to be in jail. Interesting view. My view is more that there's something wrong with each of us, that if we follow those things that are wrong with us and we amplify them, that it leads us to a bad place. Jail, hell, divorce, addiction, hurt, all kinds of things. It's not just jail, but it's something to do with the human condition. It's not society doing it to us. It's because we're broken as individuals. But anyway, my point is we had very different ideas about the necessity of corrections and what it's meant to do, but it had less to do with the politics and more to do with our underlying and deeply held worldview. So I would encourage you to think about your own worldview and how it informs your politics, and what this moment, what this interview with Peterson, Poilievre, an hour and 40 minutes, it seems to be getting a lot of traction. I think that's saying something about a thirst for depth in a world of info bites, that people crave something deeper. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. I appreciate you watching. I would really appreciate it if you left some comments. Tell me if I'm onto something here. Am I making this too vague? Is this just a political interview and Poilievre is like any other politician? Or is something deeper happening here in our politics, in our culture, and even our religion? Let me know what you think. Leave a comment below, and thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. Oh, and just to leave you with this for fun, I'll read you the entire psalm. It's a short one, 9 verses. Psalm 20. May the Lord answer you when you are in distress. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and grant you support from Zion. May he remember all your sacrifices and accept your burnt offerings. May he give you the desire of your heart and make all your plans succeed. May we shout for joy over your victory and lift up our banners in the name of our God. May the Lord grant all your requests. Now this I know, the Lord gives victory to his anointed. He answers him from his heavenly sanctuary. with the victorious power of his right hand. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They are brought to their knees and fall, but we rise up and stand firm. Lord, give victory to the King. Answer us when we call.